Today, we're going to be talking about mindset and how to stop people pleasing and how we can challenge ourselves so that we can go outside of our comfort zone and not allow a limited mindset to stand in the way of us reaching our goals. Let me briefly introduce her before I bring her on. Wendi Zimmer grew up as a people pleaser and a fixer. She survived by hiding her struggles. On the outside, she appeared to have it all together, but inside, she was miserable. She developed a process to fix her own mindset and now teaches others with her message, Your Mindset Gives You Power. She is the author of the Force Continuum, How to Shift Your Mindset to Transform Your Life. Wendy is an expert in mindset development, a professor of Texas A&M University, an educational consultant, and the owner of Learning Engaged. In her academic career, she has spoken at over 100 conferences and given dozens of invited presentations. With over 20 years of experience as an educator, Wendy has witnessed the impact destructive mindsets have on learning, self-esteem, and well-being in herself and her colleagues, as well as her students. Through years of research and experience, Wendy has developed actionable strategies to make mindset development practical. As a result, she has helped thousands of people take power over their own mindset. Hello, thank you so much for being here on the Mental Health Break podcast today.
Hi, thank you so very much. I'm grateful to be here and excited for our conversation today.
I am too. Now, I know you're the expert in mindset, and mental health is all about mindset. It impacts every area of our lives. So, can you tell me a little bit about what got you started? I know I did a really quick, brief introduction about you being a people pleaser at one time and really struggling with your own mindset growing up. Can you share with us what that looked like, and then why did it lead you to specialize in improving people's mindsets?
Absolutely. So it's interesting, our life takes us on trajectories that we never fully anticipated, right? But there were actually two times in my life that kind of overlapped of sorts. One was when I started my doctorate and joined the PhD program at Texas A&M University. There was so much emphasis on expertise, and it's very easy for anyone in a PhD program to feel, imposter syndrome, which is something that we talk about often. And so that was the first piece that I experienced. And then as I was going through my doctoral program, my daughter, who is now 9, about to be 10, but she started having a lot of health issues and in and out of hospitals, and we were having a lot of conversations with doctors. And what I quickly realized was not only was my mindset not where I needed it to be because of my people-pleasing tendencies and because of largely that imposter syndrome kind of overlapping, but I was not able to advocate for her the way that she needed me to. And so it was interesting. Both of those instances ended up overlapping and kind of led me on this trajectory of digging deeper into mindset and the effect that mindset has just on our overall daily mental well-being.
What a powerful reminder that mindset isn't just about I can do it or I can, have more confidence and better self-esteem. It can literally impact somebody's life or death or their health care, or it can hold us back in so many ways in our lives, financially, professionally, in our relationships. I look at it as it was anxiety for me holding me back, and that was impacting my mindset. It was impacting my self-talk. Is there a connection in your mind between anxiety and mindset, or do you see it as different?
No, there is definitely a connection. And I think largely that anxiety is what holds us back from really stopping and thinking about the mindset that we're having around things. Back to my experience, there was the anxiety of my daughter being sick, but then there was also the anxiety of I didn't understand the medical terms that they were giving me. I didn't even know the right questions to ask or feel that I was in a position where I could ask those questions. And so my anxiety was very limiting and caused me to, again, to not even think about what was I thinking? Where was I? What was I feeling? It was truly just this survival mentality. And had I stopped and thought about my mindset in that moment, my responses would have been so different. But everything I was doing was reactive there was no proactive activity. There was no, again, mindset development in that moment. And that was, at least at the beginning, luckily I figured it out and shifted it. But at least at the beginning, that wasn't serving my daughter well. And it was not serving me well in that moment either.
Yeah, and I often talk about how my own mindset, I mean, we could call it anxiety, we can call it mindset, but when I realized it, as I knew I was capable of so much more in my 20s, but there was always something holding me back. And it limited me in so many ways. It limited me in the job interviews I went to. It limited me in the jobs I pursued. It limited me if it required any kind of attention on me. I didn't want to be in that spotlight. I didn't want that kind of attention on a job. Um, so it limited me, it limited my choices. And I mean, that's just me professionally. For you, it could have impacted the health of your daughter because you didn't feel confident enough to stand up to medical advice or advocate for your daughter. And that could be a really scary thing. And so when people talk about mindset, I think it's very limited. And I think that's what interested me in your story is that people assume that it's just about striving and reaching our goals and not allowing our mindset to get in the way, but it can affect us in so many other ways. It can affect our relationships. It can affect our communication. So can you tell me about some of the struggles that you've noticed outside of your daughter's healthcare?
Oh, absolutely. I'm very blessed. I spend a lot of my time teaching. I'm faculty at Texas A&M University, and I spend a lot of my time teaching amazing college students. And I see the same thing with them. It's that, truly living day by day, limiting, their capabilities, limiting what they are able to do. And that is honestly, when I started digging into research, besides the research that I did on myself, obviously, when I started digging into research, my first participants, if you want to call them that, were my students, because I would see their anxiety and I would see their limiting mindset. And then I shifted that outside of the education space. And I found the same message over and over and over again. And as I talked to, whether it was my students or whether it was other adults that I was interacting with, the same conversations kept coming up, because there were conversations around, I know I need to work on my mindset. I know I need to believe in myself. I know I'm enough, right? Like the things that we hear all the time, but if we don't actually believe them, and then the second part of that is know how to believe, then it's just a conversation, because we hear all the time, you must believe in yourself. You're good enough. Don't let people tell you you're not. But if you don't actually have the strategies and the resources to unlock that understanding, to unlock that potential, then you can have, the conversation all the time. You mentioned a minute ago about self-talk, right? Our self-talk plays such a massive part in our mindset and how we overcome anxiety, how we cope with anxiety, how we interact with the people around us on a daily basis. And if we don't even know how to talk to ourselves in a way that's kind, it's basic understanding. And it sounds so simple on the surface, but it is so complex. And we take for granted that because we have these conversations all the time and because we're talking about it more now, that people actually know what it means to work on your mindset or believe in yourself.
You mentioned several things that brought up some things for me. On the one hand, if we understand athletics and we understand coaching, and we understand that when a coach is working, like the importance of having a coach as an athlete, like Simone Biles or any top of the line athlete, they have coaches that really help them with their mindset. Because one thing that really impacted her chances at gold at the Tokyo Games, I believe, was she got the willies, or she got something, the twisties that really stood in the way of her mindset, and she was not able to execute at the level that she's used to performing. And we all understand, wow, a coach really helped her get her mind straight, and she was able to do that, right? And it took therapy, it took a lot of work. But for the common people, like I'm not an athlete. I didn't belong in any team. I didn't have a coach. And I know the majority of people that didn't grow up that way, they don't understand the concept of why it's important to have somebody help you with your mindset. Because when we're in our own head and we're talking to ourselves, our self-talk can be garbage because that's what we've picked up. And the other thing that you picked, the with the whole athlete thing, when we hear coaches, they're not telling these athletes to say nice things to themselves, right? They're just like, get out there and do it, and just do it. And they're yelling at them and they're telling them, you're no good, you got to go do it. And that's not going to work for the regular person. And that's why you mentioned our self-talk. It has to be kind. It has to be, but we're so used to beating ourselves up and treating ourselves really bad and saying, oh, I'm just a jerk. I can't do it. I'm not good enough. And we think that that is helpful. But analogy I use is if you had a toddler that was learning how to draw, and the minute they drew something, you're like, oh, you suck. That's so stupid. What the heck is wrong with you? Why can't you do better? That poor kid's going to give up before they start. But that's how we talk to ourselves all the time. But when we think about how we work with toddlers, how we talk to them, we're like, oh my gosh, we're all clapping for them. We have this big old smile on our face. We're like, you did it. That's so awesome. And that motivates them to take the next step and do a better job and grow. But we don't see that. So when you're working with these college students, how do you get them to stop at the self beating up self-talk that they have, the negative that I think the majority of us do, calling ourselves stupid, saying we're not good enough, we can't do it. How do you change that so that they can talk to themselves nicer as if they were that little toddler?
That's a great question. And honestly, I love your analogy because I think that's perfect. And I often tell anyone that I work with something similar of like, if someone else was speaking to you the same way that you talk to yourself, would you stay around that person, right? Would you interact with them? Would you go to them for advice? Would you go to them for any sort of conversation that mattered? And 9 times out of 10, the answer is absolutely not. No, I would never be around someone who spoke to me the way that I speak to myself. But so often when I even have that conversation with my students or with other clients, the first thing they do is like, oh, they drop their shoulders, they drop their head, this moment of realization of I never thought about it that way. But it is those little resources, those little strategies that we can easily start to add to our lives. Like with my students, I will often have them, tell me one thing you're grateful for today, or turn to the person next to you and tell them one thing that happened today that made a difference or was important to you. And I give them strategies for doing that. Because a lot of times at the beginning, it'll be like, it's just been a really rough day. And I'm like, okay, look outside. It doesn't have to be something huge, right? We think all of these things to bump us up and to make us feel better and to make us feel accomplished. It has to be something huge. I have to win this award. I have to celebrate this huge success. I have to graduate from college. I have to get the job I want, whatever that looks like, right? But we don't stop and celebrate the little things and really look around. And so I get my students in the habit of be grateful that the sun is shining. Be grateful that you were able to walk to class with a friend today. Be grateful that you only walked in a minute late as opposed to 10 minutes late because traffic was so bad. The little things that we overlook and we take for granted. I think we do a bad job in our society of not recognizing the value of the little things. It doesn't have to be monumental. And if we're talking about mindset development and we're talking about really increasing our mental health, having a proactive approach to increasing our mental health, it has to be little things. We're all busy. We all have so much going on. Being able to drastically shift our lives is never going to happen. But we can implement, I shouldn't say never, but rarely going to happen. But we can simply implement little things into our lives, like paying attention to the good that's happening around us, paying attention to the little things, celebrating, not saying go out and buy yourself something fancy just because you actually, accomplished something this week that you didn't think you were going to. But having those celebrations, and I have found with my students and my clients, just those two strategies make a massive, massive difference. But it takes time. It takes time for someone, to your point, because we don't all have coaches that are around us every day going, okay, find what you're grateful for, look around you for things that make you happy, find your joy, all of those things. But I can do that for my students, and I can do that for my clients, so that it becomes more automatic for them. It becomes a habit in their lives. And there's a lot of other little strategies that I do, but I find that those two make the biggest difference. And really, my students and my clients have reported that make a big impact in their lives.
What you're doing is teaching them how to rewire their brain. Yeah. And it's a pruning thing. I use this analogy all the time, where if I'm going to grandma's house at a certain path and I'm constantly walking that path, that gets so ingrained in me, I don't even have to think about it. I'm automatically just get up and I can walk over there with my eyes closed. But if I decide that path is scary, or I no longer want to walk that path, it's really dark or it's too long, I'm going to create another path. Mm-hmm. It's going to take me some time to make this new path automatic. And eventually that old path gets, covered up with leaves, and the path will no longer be available to me. But that process is pruning in our brain. If we no longer use a certain thing, if we're constantly reminding ourselves to focus on the positive, focus on gratitude, focus on the little things that actually make a difference for us, eventually we're training our brain to look for the positives and not automatically go down that negative road.
Yes.
And once we do that, we're rewiring our brain, and we're training our brain, and we can cut off that negative mindset. I used to be like that. I used to automatically be catastrophizing, be negative, like, oh God, everything is such a big deal. Everything is so negative. And then when I focused on the gratitude, when I focused on looking at it positively, eventually my mind automatically goes there. I don't have to work too hard. And that's the value that I think needs to be emphasized, because they're saying, well, unless I win the big award, it doesn't matter that I'm doing these little things. But I always use the analogy of celebrities that have worked their entire life to get what they want. They wanted the big mansion, they wanted the big roles, they wanted the money, but they feel empty because their mindset was never worked on. They never built up that resiliency. They never built up the other tools, the coping strategies that, okay, now I got the award, now what? You can't constantly chase the next high. You have to be, gratitude makes us be content with where we are.
And honestly, that's what the research supports as well. So I do research in my lab, but also just research from others. Essentially, you pay attention to what you pay attention to. I mean, so if you start to pay attention to the negative in your life, it's just this downward spiral, and you find yourself looking for the negative. You're looking for the next shoe to drop. You're looking for something bad to happen to you, because that's just what always happens to you, right? But if you start looking for the good, your life honestly largely stays the same. The same negative things are happening, the same positive things are happening. You're just highlighting the positive. And it's amazing how we can allow ourselves, because it's a choice. We have a choice which direction we go. But so often it's easier to go the negative route. And so that's the direction we go. And over in the research, more and more, they're finding that rewiring our brain takes so little compared to how complex our brain actually is, right? If you look at neuroscience research, our brain is unbelievably complex. But there are little things that we can do that make a massive difference if we just know how to do them.
Yeah, I mean, what they say, we have 60,000 thoughts a day, and we have to pay attention. My biggest, I don't know if this helps with your students and clients, but what I suggest to my patients and clients is you have to first become aware of the self-talk. Yes. Because if you don't know what the negative loop is, how are you going to change it? Mm-hmm. You have to first identify it and write it down, talk back to it. I often use my little guy here that, it's easier to externalize it away from ourselves and talk to something outside of ourselves. This can represent mindset. This little guy can represent mindset. He can represent anxiety, whatever, but it's easier to externalize it and talk to something. Like you said, what you said is somebody was talking to you like this, would you want to be around them? I always tell my patients that, especially with the OCD mindset or the anxiety, if I went around and followed you around all day and I told you and I bullied you and I told you how awful you are, how negative, you're no good, you can't do this, the world's going to end, and I'm just basically Chicken Little having a panic attack constantly around you, you're going to either calm me down and try to take care of me and be like, it's okay, or you're going to be like, oh my gosh, I got to get away from her, she is too much. And when we need to figure that out for ourselves, and when our mind goes out of control, that doesn't mean we have to go with whatever the chaos is. We can calm our central nervous system, breathe into it, and kind of, like you said, focus on gratitude, focus on the present moment, look out the window. The world, your internal world might be in chaos right now, but when you look outside, you're like, oh my gosh, it's all like,
Yes.
nature's perfect.
And we often, like, most of us, right? Not obviously not 100%, but most of us, that's so much of this is advice that we would give our friends, right? We would give, I have an almost 10-year-old daughter. It's advice that I give my daughter. But so often we either don't recognize it in ourselves, or we don't feel like we deserve it, or we don't feel like we're worthy of whatever this looks like. And it's so easy to give this advice to others, and we don't practice what we preach, essentially. And I find it more and more, especially with women, not 100% with women, but a lot in my research, often with women, is we are cheerleaders for others. We lift each other up. We are there to support our friends, our colleagues and other things. But when it comes to supporting ourselves, we are horrible. We are horrible. And it's not intentional. We don't set out to do it, but we give and give and give and give so much to others and don't stop to think about what it's doing for ourselves. Because we know all the things like, oh, I need to exercise. I need to eat healthy. Because they talk all the time about women need to, you need to take care of yourself. You need to really work on your mental health, not just your physical health. Take care of yourself. But it gets, again, eat healthy, exercise, take a bath when you're tired, take time to yourself. But for many people, women especially, there's a lot of guilt around that. There's a lot of, but if I'm out at an exercise class, where are my kids? Who's taking care of my family? All of those pieces. But also, we think it has to be this massive commitment. And then we feel guilty because we don't do it. I'm not exercising more. I'm not eating healthy. I'm not whatever, where yes, that's a part of it. And yes, that's a huge piece of self-care. But the other side of self-care, like you said, is self-talk, and is thinking about, how am I investing in myself? How am I helping myself? Even if it's 2 minutes or 5 minutes, it doesn't have to be this massive transformation where now I'm paying for sitters, or my husband's coming home early from work, or my spouse is coming home, or whatever that looks like, right? And while the conversation I am so grateful for around mental health is expanding, there's still pieces that are drastically missing. And I think that's a part of it is just the little pieces, because we're not talking about, oh, we're in severe depression or suicide. Well, that is a very large concern that we need to be talking about. But there's also all of these people that are on the other end of the spectrum that aren't there yet, but they still need support, and they still need to invest in themselves, and they still need resources so that they can thrive and not just survive as they move up and down this spectrum that we have.
When you're talking about these busy women, a lot of them feel like, I don't have time to take care of myself.
Yes.
Well, you're not going to have time to get sick and be debilitated or bedridden or have some major illness by neglecting yourself. It's like putting that oxygen mask on yourself first. What people don't realize is that when you invest 5 minutes of just calming your brain, or 5 minutes of journaling, 5 minutes of just taking care of yourself, and just having a slow morning and having that moment to yourself and being in a space of gratitude, that helps you be more efficient. It helps you be more productive. It helps you be more present and be a better wife, a better mom, a better friend, than just being frazzled and running around and just doing everything at once, because you feel like, if I put one ball down for my juggling, the whole thing's going to collapse. But I think it's just, again, a mindset change. It's just a prioritization, that we're not used to. And I'm wondering, and you don't have to like get into it if you don't feel comfortable, but what happened with your mindset? You basically gathered those negative thoughts as a child. That was reprogramming that you basically operated on automatically until you decided, I no longer want to have that operating system. I want to upgrade. I want to do something different. If you feel comfortable, do you want to talk about some of that? And then how can you like look back and say, okay, uh, a lot of times it's not even our family. It could be something we heard on the playground. But
Yes.
it gets stuck in our little 7-year-old brain, and then that becomes our operating system. So if you've identified that and you feel comfortable, do you want to share that?
Absolutely. And it's a great question. It's interesting you brought it up because so much of this does stem from our backgrounds, right? Our backgrounds and our experiences. And I I was so fortunate. I still have, they're both still alive, but I have the most amazing parents, and I had a fantastic childhood from a family perspective. But I had some people in my friend groups who were not kind, who were very much not kind, and made fun of me often and picked on me. I say friend group, looking back on it now, they weren't my friends. But when you're in elementary school and moving on to junior high, right, you don't even know. Um, and I remember specifically, you mentioned on the playground that I I hadn't thought about this in years. I was standing on, that's back when you could have monkey bars and all the things because it was just different times, right? And I was standing on the top of the monkey bars, and I was in fourth grade, and there was a little kindergartner running by who I was friends with her older sister. And I said something like, "Come here, Buckaroo, I want to talk to you," or something like that. And apparently, because I used the word Buckaroo, I got made fun of for that. And that continued. Now, was it debilitating? No. But that was the point. There was a shift from me where I was an outgoing, engaging student to where I started becoming quieter. And it was not just that instance, but there were little instances in my, educational career where I got picked on for things I said or things I wore, as do many kids, right? And I didn't know how to deal with it. I didn't share it with my parents because I didn't want them to get worried. Again, those people pleasing tendencies, right? I don't want to make anyone else upset or make anyone else take on my burdens. So I held that in, and that continued well into adulthood, where I didn't want to speak if I didn't have to speak. And I didn't want to, have to share my opinion in a room where it might be judged or contradicted. And this was even up until, I consider myself to be a very successful faculty member. I am successful in my research. I'm successful in my teaching. I love my job. I love what I do. But even up until a couple of years ago, there was still that part of me, that little child inside me that was like, oh, if I say this, is someone going to make fun of me, essentially? Not that anyone makes fun of you as an adult, but it's still that mindset. But I had to shift because, again, that doesn't serve me well. And there are still moments, and I teach communications. That's my primary area of teaching. And there are still moments as I'm talking to my students about public speaking, because there's such a fear of public speaking, which is understandable. Number one fear in some polls is public speaking. And then we have death as number two, and then death by public speaking is number three, which I always find kind of funny. But there's still that, to get over using your voice, and to get over not feeling small, and to get over this sense of, what is someone else going to think of me? What is someone else going to feel or judge me for? You have to completely shift your mindset almost. And it's a constant process. I was going to say almost every time, and maybe not almost every time because you develop those habits, but every time I get up in front of a large group to speak, I still have to have a moment that's like, you got this. You are good at what you do. You are capable. You are strong. All of those things that I've taught myself to do along the way, because while I have overcome a ton of what I have experienced throughout my life, that's my default. I'm introverted by nature. My default is to sink back and be small because it's easier, but easier doesn't serve me. And so now I've taught myself, it's actually a great resource that I teach my clients. And it, again, that's part of why I present dozens of strategies and resources to my clients, because it's not a one size fits all. But for me, I've discovered that if I just put my hand on my chest and I barely press and I close my eyes and I breathe in and out just a couple of times really slowly, which takes what, 15 seconds? I get out of my head, I calm my nerves, I'm good. That no longer is that little girl who's afraid to be judged and afraid to be made fun of. She's gone. And now I'm the strong, independent person that knows what I'm talking about. And, but it's been a process to get there. And so that's to your question. It's definitely something that we all have to overcome. And if you don't stop and think about what's gotten you here, I often tell my clients, like, you are here. You are here. You can't do anything about the past. It does you no good to dwell on it. But there is value in stopping and thinking about what got you to here. And what are those experiences and backgrounds and biases and all of those pieces that have gotten you to this point today? Because this is where you are. It's not good. It's not bad. It is. And you get to grow and develop and move from here. But you've got to take some time to reflect on what got you here, so you know what areas of your identity, right? Your mindset, which of those aspects are strong and forceful and going to power you through, and which are the ones that if you don't start working through are going to constantly put up those barriers, those limits in your life. And most of the time, I didn't until I started doing my research. Most of the time, we don't actually allow ourselves to reflect on those past instances, those past experiences that got us here, to then be able to move forward.
I think a lot of people just assume when I get older, I'm just going to get better. And it doesn't happen that way. You have worked on yourself. I've definitely worked on myself, because anxiety was such a huge barrier for me to be able to even do this, to even be able to like talk to people and put myself out there and be online. But we can understand this concept for somebody like, I don't know, again, let's go use Simone Biles as an example.
Mhm.
Obviously, she wasn't the gymnast she is today when she first started. She definitely had talent, but it was her actually constantly evaluating, okay, what went wrong? How did I get this better? What was I doing before? How much better am I from when I first started? We don't evaluate ourselves the same way. We don't sit here and say, oh my gosh, I used to be so anxious, and I've constantly worked on myself. I've put myself in difficult situations. I've challenged myself, because somebody like you and I, who this isn't natural for us, like public speaking, death by public speaking. I mean, for most of my life, that's that's what I always often imagine. But it's a matter of doing it anyway. Courage is not having no fear, because fear is definitely something. Every time I go to publicly speak, it's definitely there. And every public speaker that I know, famous or not famous, has that fear. It's not something that you just go out there and everybody there are some people that actually love the attention, and they're very natural at it. But for the majority of us, it's not natural, but we do it anyway. And that's what courage is. Because if I had no fear and I did something that was, for most people, scary, it's not courageous of me. It's the fact that I did it anyway, despite the fear, and I challenged myself. That's where I grow. Like, I love this image of everything that we want is outside of our comfort zone, right?
Mhm.
If we stay in our little circle, we're going to be comfortable,
Yes.
but the magic is right outside that comfort zone. So we have to expand our comfort zone. We have to challenge ourselves. We have to dare to tip our toe on the other side and say, I did it and it was okay.
And if we fail, that's okay too, right? If it doesn't go the way we wanted it to, or if there's such fear behind failure of, I'm going to try this and I'm going to dip my toe into it, and then what happens if it doesn't work, or what happens if I'm on this podcast and I my way through it, right? Or I forget what I'm going to say. But recognizing the true value in failure and how that can make you even more powerful if it's used successfully. I mean, it's all part of it. I agree with you.
Well, how are you going to know how good you are until you try? And maybe the first couple of times you are going to really suck at a podcast interview. You're really going to be awful at doing a live video. You're going to, and I know I'm glad that the people that I followed gave me permission to suck
Yes.
and to fail
Yes.
forward, because I did it anyway. And oh my gosh, the first couple of videos were just really awkward. The first podcast interviews were a bunch of ums and ohs. And, but eventually you just keep doing it. You just keep doing it and you will get better. But if I had never even taken that risk, I never would have experienced some of the experiences that I've had. So, or I wouldn't have known what I'm capable of.
And then you get out of your head, right? And you get out of your head and you go, you know what? That wasn't so bad. Actually, I enjoyed it. Who'd have thought, right? Who'd have thought? I teach my students and my clients all the time because everyone's always asking, give me a piece of advice, give me a piece of advice. And my number one advice is to always don't say no to something just because it makes you uncomfortable. Now, if it's unethical, if it's immoral, if it's illegal, that's obviously a different conversation. But if your reason for saying no is because it scares you or makes you uncomfortable, that's the reason you should say yes. Because so many opportunities come at us and out of fear, we say no. And then as a result, we don't even know what we don't miss out on. Both of our lives, we are successful because of the things that we probably wanted to say no to, but we said yes to anyway, right? Like you said, we did it anyway. It's not that I just woke up one day and thought, oh, this isn't going to bother. Like, I have no fear. I'm just going to start writing a book and I'm going to be on podcasts and no, absolutely not. But it's the success that you get afterwards. And then the more that happens, the more you're like, this matters, right? I can make a difference. Look at these things that I'm doing in my life that I never thought possible. And now I can use that to impact others. And it's a life change. You talk about a mindset shift, right? It's a mindset shift that you didn't even know you were looking for. But when you find it, your life changes. It just absolutely changes.
Well, I think it's the reason we do it, right? I love the saying, when you're nervous, be of service.
Yeah.
When I make my presentations or this podcast or anything that I'm doing for the sake of somebody else could benefit from this, even if one other person hears you and I talking right now and they're inspired by it, that's what motivates me. And that's what makes me not so nervous, because I'm focusing on being of service.
Yeah.
And so, but a lot of people, and I know with people that have anxiety, I might do something and then beat myself up afterwards. Oh, that was awful. Everybody was laughing at me. And then I have to do that self-talk, where if that was my child coming to me and beating themselves up after being up there and feeling vulnerable on stage, I would like, no, you were great. You would talk to them and not catastrophize that moment. But even if they did mess up, even if I messed up, there's always learning from that. I love that whole thing is I don't fail, I learn. Either I win or I learn.
Yes.
There's no failure or losing necessarily in that. I want to fail forward. I want to keep trying different things and really mess up at certain things and really, really be bad at certain things and eventually get better. Because, like I said, Simone Biles was not Simone Biles 15 years ago. She became that person by constantly falling, constantly trying, all the injuries she's had, trying to get to where she is. That's what it takes. And it really does start with your mindset.
And even Simone Biles at the last Olympics, while she was phenomenal, she had a few errors. And
she fell.
Right. Yeah, it didn't matter. She got back up and she kept going. And she's being watched by, I haven't even seen the latest numbers of how many people watched the Olympics, but it was, thousands and thousands and thousands of people, way more people than have ever watched most of what any of us will do. Right. And so it's just, we are all human and we have to give ourselves grace. And then, but recognize if you really want something, right? The stuff that's worth doing is hard. It just is. If it's easy, then anybody can do it. And it's not what's going to fulfill you. What you mentioned earlier reminded me of, they talk a lot. You said about celebrities and how they always feel unfulfilled. And there's a lot of research on that with goal setting too. I'm a huge fan of goal setting. Set goals, like have micro goals and macro goals and all of those things for yourself. But the issue is if we only focus on that final product, right? Then when we get there, we're still unfulfilled. Like people can get into serious depression. They've done research on Olympians. And once they win the gold medal, they actually said that people that receive the bronze medal are the healthiest from a mental health perspective because they can celebrate. Where people who win the silver medal are always like, oh, but I didn't get gold, right? It's always that I didn't get to the optimum level. And then people who win the gold medal achieve that optimum mastery success. And now what? Now I've been fighting for this for as long as I can possibly remember. And now I have nothing else to achieve. Where if we focus on the process and what we're like the award, the marathon, the whatever the final piece is, that's the celebration. The learning happens through the process. And we forget that a lot of times. We forget the value in becoming whatever it is that we want to become or doing whatever it is we want to do. And then we get to that end and we achieve whatever that looks like. And we're still not happy because it's not enough, because we've only ever focused on the end result. And we haven't used our mindset to think about the value and the opportunities that are happening along the way. And so the research around that is fascinating, because I think so much of what we look at is achieving goals, achieving goals, achieving goals, achieving goals. And I'm sure Simone Biles was like, this is my goal, right? This is what I want to achieve. And then we find out later she was pregnant, which is crazy. But regardless, like this is the level that we want to achieve. But it's all the little steps along the way that we often don't focus on, and we don't celebrate enough. And I think that's a piece of this conversation as well.
But I think we minimize because, like you said, we forget about what it took to get there. That exact thing happened to me. I remember when I got my doctorate and it was graduation time. I remember telling my supervisor how empty I felt, how I was like, it's not that big of a deal. It's just, I'm just a doctorate. It's just in psychology. Who cares? And he's like, do you know how many people out of the entire world get to this level? Do you focus on do you remember how hard you worked to get to this level? Do you remember the sacrifices you made to get this? And so because I don't know, for some reason I just didn't value it, because it's like, okay, I got it because of course I got it. Why wouldn't I get it? This is not something I would have stopped at. But he had to remind me to appreciate it. And then even then, that wasn't enough. I had to constantly remind myself that look at how hard you worked to get here for me to eventually appreciate it. And so that does. And what a new thing that I'm trying is focusing on the task that I have to do, not the final outcome. Because if I'm focusing on a task and that task doesn't go according to plan, I'm not personalizing it. Yeah. I'm not judging myself for it. It's just the task didn't go according to plan. So then I'm going to try another task. It's just like little stones that I'm putting on the path to eventually reaching this goal. I'm not going to judge every little stone. If this stone didn't work, I'm going to find another stone that works better. And eventually you'll get to your goal without like beating yourself up about it. But a lot of people, if they end up setting a goal and they're not successful, they beat themselves up instead of really breaking it down. Like where in the process did this goal break down? Which task didn't fit the trajectory? So focusing on the task has been actually very motivating for me, because I just focus on that. This is all I got to do. Just focus on that task. Do the next task.
I love that. And how freeing, right? It's like I don't have to always think about this monumental piece in front of me. I can just be present with the little tasks along the way. And those are just as valuable, right? It's not, without those little tasks, you can't get to where you want to get. I also liked what you said about going through, like, once you got your PhD. I think we often, like when I'm working with my doctoral students, they'll be like, well, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, it is. So many times in lives, those huge achievements become so anticlimactic, because you're like, I worked, I got there. And then like, I went to lunch, Or, like there's nothing, there's no huge,
Yeah.
and yes, obviously with schooling, there's graduation, but even graduation can be
Yeah.
anticlimactic,
Yeah.
especially when everyone around you, I remember someone saying like, everyone around me has a doctorate, so it doesn't really matter. And in some ways, I get, but yes, but we get so stuck, right?
Yeah.
We're so stuck in our little lane. And I think we all do that, regardless. You look around you and you want to try something new. Maybe you want to write a book, or you want to start a podcast, or you want to get a promotion, or you want to become an entrepreneur, or you want to do something. And you look around, you're like, well, so many people are already doing that, because we get so narrow on, well, there's nothing new I can share. There's nothing new I can add. There's nothing new. And it's like, pause for a second. Every single one of us, there are hundreds of people who would love to have what we have, regardless of what that looks like. And again, it's celebrating those little things and being mindful of those little things that we often take for granted. Because again, if everyone around you has it, you think, well, I'm not special. This is not something unique to me, but it is. We all, every single one of us, are unique and have our own story and message to tell that's completely different from everyone else. And it's just something we don't stop and reflect on enough.
It just reminds me of like, look at the musicians, if let's say Mariah Carey decides when she first started, like, oh my gosh, there's so many really successful
Yes.
female singers. What do I have to contribute to this field? There's so many already doing what I want to do.
Yeah.
And if she would have said that and never tried, we would never have had her voice added to this. And Mariah could sing the same song as Celine Dion and somebody else, but we still want to hear Mariah and Celine and somebody else. It doesn't mean that one person, or you wrote a book, we could write the same book. I could write a book on mindset, but I'd want to read your book and my book. It doesn't mean that one book is enough. Look at all the authors that are writing on the same topic. And that's what we need to remind ourselves. And I think it's just a coaching issue, but also it's us reminding ourselves of our worth and our value, and that we have something to contribute, and to not listen when this little guy freaks out and starts saying all these negative things to us. We just have to keep saying that, reminding ourselves, I can do this. These are things I want to do. And then be in alignment with who you really are. I'm also a big fan of just sitting with things and asking yourself, is this something I want to do? Does this feel good with me? And then pursue it. Otherwise, if you're chasing something that somebody else told you to chase, you're not going to be as motivated.
100%. And I think we oftentimes we try to commercialize everything. I love what you said about having those, just to remind, those little things in your life to remind you. You have to remind yourself. And we often, and I do the same thing when I work with clients. I will tell them, create a mantra, or we go into alter ego research and those kinds of things. If you'll notice, I'm the wrong way. I have my I believe in you statement, and part of that's for my students when they come in my office. I'm in my office today, but in some ways it's for me too, because there are days where it's like, oh my gosh, I had 40 things today and it feels like 35 of them did not go the way they were supposed to. And so while that message is there for my students, it's largely there for me as well. And is it a mantra? Sure, you can call it whatever you want. But I think those little things around, I have Post-it notes on the bottom of my computer monitors. I have little things that in some ways we tell ourselves are dumb. That's dumb. Why would I? But if we stop for a second and embrace the fact that we all need it. We all need to be our biggest cheerleaders. We all need to support ourselves so that we can support others. And so I agree with you. It's just those things that we need to get in the habit of saying to ourselves and not make it so commercialized. I don't have to have anything fancy. I have a Cricut. That's how I can, but my Post-it notes that are on my windows and on my monitors are just things I needed in the moment. And then when I don't need them anymore, I throw them away, and it's not a big deal. It's just something to make me smile, and it makes me feel good. And if I can find joy in it, then, same thing. I was just looking, I give my students gold stars, because I'm like, you know what? We all need a gold star. I'll walk around the hall and stick gold stars on kids I don't even know. Kids, sorry, they're adults, they're college kids. But I'll stick, because it's something as simple as that can literally help you find joy in your day. And we just have to be more intentional about taking care of ourselves and what makes us feel valued and worthy.
We need the reminders.
We
And
do.
the reminders that you have on your wall, on your window, on your computer, those are the reminders. We all need them. We get so caught up in the negative mindset. We just need the reminders to get us back out and remind us of our worth and our value. And it's sad that we do need them, but we do. We're just
We do.
too distracted. We're too busy. We're too inundated with negativity. We need to bring ourselves back in our body and remind ourselves.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I know that you have a new book coming out. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
I would love to. So the book is called The Force Continuum, how to transform your mindset to essentially get what you want. And the premise behind the book is honestly a lot of what we talked about today, but it's focused on 4 pillars, things that you can do in your life to really help you believe in yourself, to unlock that power that we all have inside us. We all have it inside us. When I took those steps to become an advocate for my daughter, that power was already there. I just had to figure out how to tap into it. And so those 4 pillars are identity, mindset, habits, and energy. And the book sets out, essentially, it's a workbook because I'm a teacher by trade. I can't not teach. But I wanted to write a book that was based on my experiences, but took those 4 pillars and help me and all of my readers dig into how can we take who we want to be, our identity, how we think about ourselves, our mindset, our habits. So essentially what we're doing to work, that taking action, because we haven't even talked about action, but none of this stuff we talked about today will happen without action. It just won't. I can't sit and have things happen to me. I have to take action on them. And then energy is obviously the piece that flows throughout, the energy we receive and the energy that we give. But how do you dig into all 4 of those and figure out your unique combination? What makes the identity you want to have, the mindset you want to have, the habits you want to develop, and the energy you want to gain and to use to essentially develop your force, develop that power inside you to believe in yourself. And so the book provides, there's 40 plus strategies, because again, as I mentioned before, we're all unique, we're all different, but ways that you can work on any aspect of who you are and who you want to be. Those small steps that, putting your hand on your heart and breathing, the finding gratitude, the little things that I've talked about today, and then some larger ones, but anything that we can do to help us believe in ourselves and believe in one another. There's even a chapter on how do you help others believe in themselves. And like I said, I wrote the book largely based on my life and then my research as a faculty member. But I set out, so much of what I wanted to do was take what I give my clients and I give my students and use that information to reach a broader audience. Because to what you mentioned earlier, if what I've learned and what I've lived through can help one person, then that is why I'm here on this planet. And so I wanted to write this book to be able to reach people who aren't my students, who aren't my clients, who don't walk in my door every day, and change our mindset on who we are and what we are capable of doing. And like, as I said, because we deserve it, and we need to have a conversation more around how we can do those things and not just what we need to do. There's plenty of resources on what should happen and what we need to do to take care of ourselves and believe in ourselves. But this book looks at the how, which is something that I worked very hard for when I was working on my mindset and what I want to deliver to others.
Yeah, I love that. Taking action is so important. Take imperfect action. It doesn't even have to be good action.
Yeah.
Just take any action. Just
Yes.
walk towards that direction.
Any action, small steps.
Exactly. Yeah, definitely needed. And I know that because so many people are talking about the same things nowadays online, and the message can get kind of lost in the whole noise of it. But it's just like you said, when you were looking for something like this, it didn't exist. And now we might have many, many choices, but finding a system that actually gets us to take action, to actually apply these skills is really important. And so I'm glad you wrote this book. When is your book going to be available?
So January 10th is if all goes the way it's supposed to. January 10th is the release date. And right now it will be out in print. And then the next step, I hope to do an audiobook. That will be the steps after that, because the book is designed. I joke that it's a choose your own adventure book. If you're like me and you're a kid of like the 90s, those choose your own adventure books where you could get to a point and then, and so if you want to read the book from start to finish, fantastic. I would love for you to, but we're all in different places in our lives. And if you're like, you know what? Nope, I'm strong in my identity. I know who I am and who I want to be, but my mindset is really where I need to work. Then you move to the mindset chapter and you work through those parts. And so you can kind of jump back and forth. I wanted it to be, we are all have so many other things in our lives. And so I wanted this book to be as easily accessible as possible. And so I think an audiobook is a good next step. So people can listen in their cars, or they can listen while they're out, if they do have time to take a walk or whatever that looks like, right? And to increase accessibility for anyone in any modality that works well for them. So that's the plan.
Good luck with the audiobook. It is definitely a lot of work.
Thank you. I have heard. So we'll see how it will definitely be a labor of love, I'm sure, but it'll be worth it.
It will be. No, it's great. Where can people find you if they want to follow you and they want to learn more about you and your work?
Fantastic. Yes, please follow me. So you can find me on LinkedIn. It's just Wendi Zimmer, as up here on the screen. Or my website is learningengaged.com. And if you go to www.learningengaged.com/force, you will find more information on the book. There's a free resource there for you to kind of get a sneak peek at some of the resources and strategies that are listed in the book. And then please reach out on LinkedIn. I'm also Wendi Zimmer on Twitter and Instagram, X and Instagram. So find me, connect. I would love to hear everyone's stories about how you're working on your mindset and things in your life that have helped you believe in yourself, or areas that you want to keep believing in yourself. This is a conversation that we all need to continue to have, because it's easy to say, but not easy to take action on. And so I'm honored to be a part of this conversation today, and hope you will all reach out so we can continue this conversation further past this podcast.
I will add all of that to the show notes, so it'll be available for people to reach out to you. So thank you so much for having this conversation with me. It was a really enlightening discussion, and I hope that, like you said, it benefited at least one person.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. This was a joy. It's been the highlight of my day.
Oh, wonderful. One thing went right.
Exactly, right? Highlight the good. This is definitely the good.
That was such a great conversation with Dr. Zimmer. She was so full of knowledge and wisdom, and this was such a great conversation about the importance of changing our mindset and focusing on changing that self-talk that can definitely stand in the way of us reaching our goals, about even making progress in our lives. A lot of times we can limit ourselves with our self-talk, with our mindset. And so I loved having this conversation with her, because not only is she doing research on all this, but just sharing how it impacted her own life and her ability to advocate for her daughter. And we talked about how it can limit us in other areas of our lives as well. So it is important to focus on improving and fail forward, take risks, go outside that comfort zone, take these chances, and don't allow your mindset to hold you hostage and to hold you back. So try some of the strategies that she talked about, and I hope that it makes a difference for you. If you want to learn more about Dr. Wendi Zimmer, go to drsekandari.com/podcast, and we'll add all the information in our show notes so that you can actually have access to her website and then also get her book as well. Please don't forget to subscribe and follow us so that you can get notified when new podcast episodes drop. Until next time.